Hi, I'm Sly Grandpa. Let's start our story. At my son's wedding, his bride turned to me and said, "You're not welcome here. Leave." The words hit me like a punch, and I could feel the eyes of 60 guests drilling into me, the man who had paid for every last detail of this party. My ex-wife, Linda, stepped forward, a triumphant smile lighting up her face, backing the woman who had spent years draining my bank account. Even my own son chose to believe her lies over the love and sacrifices I had poured into his life. They assumed they were watching a defeated father quietly accept exile from his family. But they had seriously underestimated me, David Martinez. While they toasted to the success of their scheme, I was quietly plotting the most ruthless revenge Chicago society had ever seen. Their so-called fairy tale was about to turn into a nightmare. But before I get into the shocking things I discovered about Sarah's 6-month-long conspiracy, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And whether you think I was right to fight back, or if I should have just walked away quietly. I never imagined that the proudest moment of my life would twist into the most humiliating one. I stood on the rooftop terrace of Chicago's most exclusive restaurant, surrounded by 60 guests, watching my son Michael's rehearsal dinner unfold like a dream I had worked my entire life to create. The city lights shimmered below, champagne glasses caught the evening glow, and laughter floated through the air. Sarah looked radiant in her designer dress, the one I had quietly paid for myself. She stood next to Michael, preparing what I assumed would be a heartfelt thank you speech. My chest swelled with pride. Despite the divorce, I thought we were finally coming together as a family. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," Sarah began, her voice carrying across the terrace. The conversations died down instantly. "This has been such a journey for Michael and me." I smiled, lifting my glass of champagne in anticipation. Then her eyes met mine, and a cold flicker passed through them. But she pressed on, her tone sharpening. "I think it's important to address something that's been weighing on my heart." The terrace went completely silent. Michael and I have talked extensively about toxic relationships. My smile faltered. Something felt off. Her gaze never wavered from me. "Now I understand why Linda left you, David. You're emotionally unavailable and controlling. Michael deserves better than your toxic influence." Her words hit me like a series of punches. "You think throwing money around makes you a father? Real love isn't about writing checks. You've spent 30 years trying to buy love because you can't earn it. That's why your marriage failed. That's why Michael came to me for real guidance instead of his pathetic excuse for a father." Every pair of eyes on the terrace turned to me. The warm evening air suddenly felt suffocating. "Sarah, please," Michael started weakly. "No, Michael," she cut him off, stepping closer, voice venomous. "David, you're a lonely, bitter man who ruins everything you touch. You're the reason this family fell apart. You're not welcome here. Leave." The terrace was dead silent. I could hear my heart pounding. Then I saw her, Linda. My ex-wife had been standing among the guests, waiting for this moment, a triumphant smile on her face. "Sarah's absolutely right," she said, her tone dripping with satisfaction. "Michael finally found someone who can see through your manipulation, David. Someone who won't enable your controlling, narcissistic behavior like I did for 20 years. The world tilted on its axis. This wasn't spontaneous. This was calculated, a full-scale character assassination." I froze as whispers rippled through the crowd. Some guests looked away, embarrassed, others seemed entertained by the spectacle. My son stared at the floor, silent and motionless, just like he always did when confronted with conflict. Finally, he spoke, and his words cut deeper than any insult Sarah had hurled. "Dad," he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "You're not welcome here. Just, go." The dismissal from my own son was a knife to the heart. Complete public devastation. I set down my champagne glass with a hand barely trembling. 30 years of fatherhood, 5 years of rebuilding after the divorce, months of planning this perfect wedding, destroyed in 4 minutes of calculated cruelty. Without a word, I walked toward the elevator. As the elevator doors closed, the shock and humiliation slowly began to make room for something darker, cold, calculating rage. They thought they could humiliate me and then continue celebrating the fairy tale wedding I was funding. They assumed I would quietly vanish, leaving my money behind as if nothing had happened. They were about to learn just how catastrophically wrong they were. Driving through downtown Chicago felt surreal, like moving through a nightmare. Red lights blurred past my windshield while my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every block reminded me of something I had built, something that suddenly felt meaningless after the events of the evening. 28 years ago, I held Michael for the first time at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, just 6 blocks from here. I remembered whispering promises to that tiny baby, that I would give him everything, that I would be the father I never had. And I had kept every one of those promises. When Linda left 5 years ago, claiming I was emotionally distant, I poured myself into being both mother and father to Michael. I attended every milestone, quietly paid his rent for months, and helped him buy Sarah's engagement ring when his savings fell short. And yet, her words still echoed like poison, pathetic excuse for a father. "You're not welcome here." But the hardest blow wasn't Sarah's insults. It was Michael's voice, "Just, go." My own son, the boy I had sacrificed everything for, had publicly disowned me in front of 60 witnesses. I pulled into my building's underground garage, the concrete walls closing in like a tomb. The elevator ride to my penthouse felt endless. When the doors opened, my penthouse felt different, emptier. The floor-to-ceiling windows that normally showcased the glittering city now felt like barriers. I poured 3 fingers of 25-year-old scotch and stood staring out at the skyline. Somewhere out there, Sarah and Linda were probably celebrating their successful ambush. Somewhere, my son was being consoled by the woman who had just destroyed his father. The scotch burned, but it wasn't nearly as sharp as the realization that I had been played. This wasn't a spontaneous humiliation, Linda's perfectly timed entrance, the coordinated attack, it was all planned. They had weaponized my love for Michael. I walked to my home office and sat behind the mahogany desk that had witnessed countless business deals. The wedding folder sat in the center of the desk, thick with contracts and receipts. Every vendor, every service, every detail of Michael and Sarah's dream wedding carried my name, my signature, my money, $87,000 spent so far. The venue alone had cost $35,000, flowers $12,000, the photographer $8,000, and catering $22,000. On top of that, there was Sarah's dress, the rehearsal dinner, and the Tuscany honeymoon I had secretly booked. I opened my laptop, scrolling through the vendor contact list, 43 suppliers, all contracted under my name, all expecting payment. They had assumed I would quietly retreat while they laughed at my destruction. They had gravely underestimated David Martinez. I reached for my phone and dialed the first number, Millennium Park Event Center, the venue where Michael and Sarah were supposed to exchange vows in less than 18 hours. My finger hovered over the call button for 3 seconds before I pressed it. "This is Jessica," the cheerful, professional voice answered. "Hello, this is David Martinez. I'm the contract holder for the Martinez-Whitaker wedding this Saturday. I'm calling to cancel the event, effective immediately." Silence. Then, "I'm sorry, sir, did you say cancel?" "Yes. Cancel everything. Release the space, terminate all services." "But sir, the wedding is this Saturday." "Are you absolutely sure?" "Absolutely. I've never been more certain of anything in my life." I hung up and moved methodically through my list: Enchanted Florals, Premier Catering Solutions, the photographer, the string quartet, the bartenders. Each conversation followed the same pattern: shock, confusion, desperate attempts to salvage the plan, then reluctant acceptance. "Mr. Martinez, this is highly unusual. We've already purchased ingredients for 200 guests. Send me the cancellation fees. I'll pay whatever's required. And what about the other vendors? Tell them to ask Sarah Whitaker. By 2 a.m., I had made 37 calls: the wedding cake designer, the transportation company, the videographer, the lighting technician, even the woman hired to scatter rose petals down the aisle. Each cancellation felt like tearing down a piece of a house of cards. Sarah and Linda had built their celebration on my humiliation. I was about to remove the foundation. Saturday arrived with perfect Chicago weather, clear skies, a gentle breeze, 72 degrees, the kind of day Sarah had probably prayed for. I parked across the street from Millennium Park Event Center at 11 a.m., 2 hours before the ceremony. The manila folder beside me contained every fraudulent transaction, every transfer to Linda, every piece of evidence I needed to expose their lies. The first guests arrived at 11:30, dressed in their finest, carrying gifts and flowers, smiling as they approached the venue, completely unaware they were walking into chaos. The doors were locked. They tried the handles, looked confused, and then pulled out their phones. Within minutes, a growing crowd gathered, all equally baffled. At noon, Sarah's white Bentley pulled up. She stepped out in a simpler backup dress, and Michael emerged behind her, looking haggard and stressed. Even from across the street, I could see their panic. Sarah rushed to the entrance, pounding on the glass doors, her voice rising as she shouted at the locked building. The guests watched uncomfortably as the bride completely lost her composure. A venue employee appeared, unlocking the doors from inside, shaking his head and holding up cancellation documents. Sarah's gestures became frantic, her voice rising to a pitch that made the air feel tense. More guests continued arriving, adding to the growing confusion. Some snapped pictures, others called to try to understand what was happening, while a few began leaving. Linda arrived by taxi at 12:15, stepping out in an expensive dress I was certain I had paid for unknowingly. She scanned the chaos with genuine shock, or perhaps excellent acting, before Sarah spotted her and rushed over. From the distance, their body language told the entire story: frantic gestures, pointed fingers, heated whispers. Linda's expression shifted from confusion to fear. By 12:30, with nearly 200 guests milling around in frustration and bewilderment, I decided it was time. I stepped out of my car, straightened my suit, and picked up the manila folder. The walk across the street felt both agonizingly slow and impossibly fast. Each step brought me closer to a confrontation that would either fully vindicate me or shatter what little remained of my relationship with Michael. As I approached, many guests recognized me and began whispering. I felt a certainty I hadn't experienced in 5 days. They had chosen this battlefield when they humiliated me publicly. Now, they would face consequences just as publicly. Sarah saw me first. Her face turned white, then red, then white again. She grabbed Michael's arm and pointed at me, mouth moving frantically. Michael turned, our eyes met across the crowd, and I lifted the manila folder just enough for him to see it, offering a faint, calm smile. The crowd parted as I walked through, conversations dwindling to whispers. Some guests looked relieved, assuming I had come to resolve the disaster. Others seemed uneasy, remembering the rehearsal dinner. "Ladies and gentlemen," I called out, my voice carrying across the gathering crowd. "I apologize for the confusion about today's ceremony. But I have important information to share that will explain everything." Sarah stepped forward, her voice shaky but defiant. "David, you're not welcome here. We told you that already." I opened the manila folder and pulled out the first page of bank statements. "Actually, Sarah, I think these 200 people deserve to know exactly why there is no wedding today, and more importantly, they deserve to know who's been paying for it all along." Linda stepped forward, her face pale. "David, that's enough. You've made your point." "Have I, Linda?" I said, holding up the next set of documents. "Because we're just getting started." I pulled out the transfer records. Every fraudulent charge Sarah made was immediately followed by a transfer of exactly 30% to an account registered under Linda Martinez's name. My ex-wife was taking a cut of everything Sarah stole. The crowd gasped. Voices rose in shock and disbelief. "Call the police," someone shouted. Linda went completely ashen. "That's not, I didn't know." "You didn't know?" I interrupted, holding up printed emails. "These are communications between you and Sarah, planning not only the theft but the public humiliation of your family. Quote, once we destroy his relationship with Michael, we can access the accounts freely." Sarah lunged for the papers, but I stepped back calmly. "This conspiracy goes back 6 months, I announced. 6 months of systematic theft while plotting to destroy my relationship with my son. They weaponized my love for Michael against me." Michael stood frozen, horror etched across his face. "Sarah, is this true? Did you really steal from my father?" Sarah's composure cracked completely. "Michael, you don't understand. He was controlling us. He was using his money to manipulate our relationship by paying for the wedding." Michael's voice was barely a whisper. "By giving us everything we asked for." "Ladies and gentlemen," I called out, my voice firm, cutting through the chaos, "I cancelled this wedding because I was funding my own destruction. These women planned to humiliate me, steal from me, and isolate me from my son." I turned to Michael, my tone softer. "Son, I hope someday you understand that everything I did was to protect you." The crowd erupted into murmurs and whispers, some guests left, others snapped photos, and a few even clapped. Sarah and Linda were exposed, their conspiracy laid bare. Michael's eyes filled with tears. "Dad. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I should have believed you." The chaos continued around us, but for a moment, it felt like Michael and I were standing in the eye of the storm. The shouts, the flashing cameras, the gossip, it all faded as my son stepped toward me, tears streaming down his face. "Dad. I should have listened. I should have seen what they were doing," he whispered. I placed my hand on his shoulder, feeling the weight of the last 5 days finally lift. "Michael," I said gently, "you were manipulated by experts. Sarah had been planning this for months." Behind us, Sarah was screaming at the dispersing crowd, "This is all lies. He's a controlling narcissist. Don't listen to him." But her voice was drowned out by 200 witnesses who had just watched the most spectacular wedding disaster in Chicago's social history. Some guests called Ubers, others took selfies, a few approached me with sympathetic words. Linda had disappeared entirely, likely slipping away during Sarah's meltdown. Michael wiped his eyes, looking at me. "Dad, how did I not see it? All those shopping trips, expensive dinners, weekend getaways I thought she was paying for. How could I have been so blind?" "Because you loved her," I said simply. "When we love someone, we want to believe the best." "Sarah counted on that," Michael said, shaking his head in disgust. "The things she said about you at the rehearsal dinner. I just stood there. I let her destroy you in front of everyone. I was confused, manipulated, and when I tried to explain, you chose to believe her over me. That hurt more than anything." Sarah muttered, "I know, and I'll regret that forever." Michael's voice thickened with shame. "You've done everything for me since I was born. You worked yourself to exhaustion to give me opportunities, and I repaid you by letting my fiancé call you a pathetic excuse for a father." The crowd was thinning now, most guests realizing there would be no reception, a few lingering, hoping for more drama. "Michael," I said, looking him in the eyes, "I didn't expose Sarah and Linda for revenge. I did it to save you. Another year of marriage to her, and she would have destroyed not just my relationship with you, but your entire future." Michael nodded grimly. "What happens now? Press charges?" "My lawyer is handling that," I said. "But what matters most is that you're safe, that you can see clearly now." "I can see," he said firmly. And I never want to see Sarah again. Dad. I know I don't deserve it after what I put you through, but is there any chance we can rebuild what I destroyed? I pulled him into a long embrace, the first real hug we had shared in months. Michael, you're my son. Always. We'll rebuild, and we'll be stronger than before. 6 months later, I stood in Lincoln Park on a crisp October morning, watching my son adjust his tie. But this wedding was completely different in every way that mattered. Only 30 guests surrounded us, people who genuinely cared about Michael and his bride-to-be, Emma Chen, a pediatric nurse he had met during his recovery. No designer gowns, no extravagant arrangements, just simple elegance and real love. Dad, thank you, Michael said as I straightened his tie. For saving me from Sarah, for forgiving me, and for giving Emma your blessing. I saw a man who had grown immensely. The naive boy who had been manipulated was gone, replaced by someone who could distinguish genuine love from calculated deception. Emma appeared beside us, radiant in a simple white dress she had bought for $300. She had insisted on covering most of the wedding costs herself. After Michael's experience, she understood the importance of financial independence and mutual respect. Mr. Martinez, she said warmly, I'm grateful you protected Michael. If you hadn't exposed Sarah's lies, he might never have found real happiness. I hugged my future daughter-in-law. Emma, welcome to our family. Please, just call me Dad. The ceremony itself was beautiful in its simplicity, a small pavilion surrounded by the vibrant colors of autumn trees. When they exchanged vows, they had written them themselves. There wasn't a dry eye among the witnesses. During the reception, I gave a short speech. 6 months ago, I thought I was planning my son's wedding. What I was actually doing was preventing his destruction. Today, I'm witnessing something far more valuable, seeing my son marry someone who loves him for exactly who he is. I looked at Michael and Emma. Real love doesn't demand financial proof. Real love doesn't humiliate family. Real love builds up, it doesn't tear down. I raised my glass to them, to the truth that real love is always worth fighting for. Later, Michael pulled me aside. Dad, the charges were finalized yesterday. Sarah pled guilty to fraud and will serve 18 months. Linda agreed to pay full restitution and received probation. Justice had been served, but the most important thing was Michael's safety and happiness. What matters, I said, is that you're happy and safe. That's all I've ever wanted. Michael smiled, the same smile he had as a little boy. I am, Dad. For the first time in years, I'm genuinely happy. Driving home that night, I reflected on the lessons learned. Sometimes protecting those we love requires being the villain in their story temporarily. Sometimes love means setting boundaries and refusing to enable destructive behavior. Most importantly, real family bonds survive anything when built on truth, respect, and genuine care. The fairy tale wedding I had originally planned was fantasy. This simple celebration of authentic love was reality, and reality was far more beautiful. People we love will test our faith in ways we never imagined, but betrayal can reveal strength we didn't know we had. David's story reminds us that standing up for truth sometimes requires courage, even when it seems like everyone is against you. Faith, integrity, and clear boundaries protect those we love. Michael and I's relationship wasn't just repaired, it was strengthened through fire. True love, respect, and family bonds survive any storm. The lesson is clear: reality built on honesty and care is always stronger than fantasy built on deception. As we pulled into the driveway, Michael turned to me. Dad, thank you. For everything. For being there, even when I didn't see it. I smiled. Always, son. Always. And for the first time in months, I felt complete peace. The conspirators had been exposed. Justice had been served. And my son's future, real, honest, and full of love, was safe.